Namaskar, everyone. Welcome back to Everything Kosher. I'm your host, Siddhi.
And I'm your other host, Serbi. Today's topic is one of great importance to our community, and we are so grateful that you're listening into the episode.
Yes. Today is January 19th.
It is. Let's talk about it.
So, January 19th marks 34 years since the harrowing events of the Kashmiri Pandit genocide of 1990. And us being first generation Kashmiri Indian American, it means so much to us to have this platform to speak about it, what it means to our community, and just delve into why it matters to us and why it should matter to everyone else speaking about our history and our community.
As Kashmiri Pandits growing up in America, our memories of Kashmir are largely from our parents' memories and their recollections of their youth and their recollections of a situation and a period of time that no individual and no community, no matter how big or small, should have to go through. We have lived our lives as Kashmiri Pandit youth separated from our homeland, and 34 years, that intangible loss still exists. This is Season 2, Episode 1, 34 Years Later, How the History of Genocide Has Shaped the Experiences of Kashmiri Pandit Youth Today. I don't know about you, Siddhi, but a large part of why I'm with KOA today and why I'm sitting here filming and recording this podcast episode is because of the history that surrounds 1989 and 1990, but also the previous experiences of our community, considering that 1989 was that seventh genocide and fourth exodus. My parents told me stories about their experiences and told me stories about the experiences of family members, but also for martyrs, famous people that had suffered such unimaginable conditions and treatments that they are kind of these figures of perseverance and the people we are trying to still fight for justice today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, Surbi, like going back to your point of like hearing stories from our parents, I think storytelling is very important, especially to our generation. And though all of our parents have different stories, at the end of the day, those who did survive this genocide, fortunately, each person has such a different story, though they all experienced the same thing, being kicked out of their homes, starting a whole life from fresh. Like it's very hard to just even imagine what our parents, our grandparents could have gone through. We have two generations who already, who have already passed away, just thinking of the hope of going back home. And we're still living with that it is their hope to go back home. And it's honestly, it's very disheartening to just see people who deny this genocide, to find people who actually have no idea about this genocide. So I'm looking forward to just talking with you, discussing like what are things that we need to keep in mind, like going forward. How can someone help us? How can our own community be there for each other?
And I think that a lot of people who don't know about it, maybe they haven't been exposed to it, but there is a large group of people, whether it's, us advocating for the youth, our parent organization and the adults, or other Kashmiri Pandit organizations that have been quite literally just shouting at the top of their voices for so many years now. And yet people have still been able to avoid hearing about it and like really listening to it. And in part, I think our community can do better. They're not responsible for other people who are not Kashmiri Pandit knowing about the situation, but I think we are responsible for telling future generations, our kids, for our parents, they told us, and continuing that forward. And I think many in our community don't talk to it about our kids. And that's why, in our interactions as a youth organization for Kashmiri Pandit youth, we see so many people that either don't know what happened or aren't connected enough to really care.
Yeah. And I think just honestly, just adding on to what you said, I've spoken about this before with Roshni Cole. She was brought on the first episode of the first season. I wouldn't say it's like fault in our parents, but like because of how horrifying the experiences were, it was very hard for our parents to really come out with the truth and just tell us like what happened, how it is. Because I know we've discussed about this, like finding out about this genocide is very different for each individual, especially me. Like one thing that I want to go back to what Roshni said is that our parents really trickled through to this. It's a tongue twister, but they didn't tell us all at once like what happened, and it's very heavy to say like what happened. And I think going forward, like how you said, for future generations, I think it's extremely important to just lay it down how it is, because there's no other way to say what happened. And tying it back to like how we've been told about it, like I was never told directly that this is what happened. I know we might have like different experiences with the way our parents told this to us, like what happened. My experience very different. I just randomly overheard my father speaking to my nani one day saying in Hindi like मैं hit list पे था. उस time पे, like at that time, I honestly I couldn't digest what a hit list meant, but in the back of my head I was like hit list, hit list, hit list. And by the time I got to the age, like hearing from everywhere, going to these KOA events, which again ties back to the importance of like having that community bond, going to these events and hearing like people speak up, so many rallies and all of these where Kashmiri Pandits do go to. And I've seen like very like little children coming there, but I still see that sort of like they don't understand what's going on. And so again, going back to like telling our kids, like our parents telling us, like I don't think my parents had the intention of telling me unless I asked. And when I did get to that age of wanting to know more, because there's so much more behind our identity being Kashmiri Pandits, and our history really forms that. And so when I eventually did ask and when everything poured out, I realized how important it is, us being Kashmiri in America, Kashmiri Pandits specifically, how important it is for us and our community to speak about it. Even though people might deny it, but finding at least one person to acknowledge it, it creates this domino effect where that person might talk to someone else about it. That person will talk to someone else about it. And that's how we get the word out. And just tying it back to what you said, speaking to our children whenever we have them, speaking to anyone we see outside of the community, also very important. But just tying people into our stories is extremely important for us, and being aware of our history. It's just, it's what we have to do to carry our community forward.
And I think like what you said about it's not our parents' fault, or for whoever may have gone through experiences where their parents weren't super open about it. They went through such an experience, and for a lot of them, the trauma and the grief prevents them from talking about it, but also they want to protect their children. Growing up like in America, they, they have the ability to protect their kids from those things that plagued, them as teenagers. Like my parents were right around 17, 16, 18, 19, right at the end of their teenage years when they were leaving. And they don't want their kids to kind of be dealing with this burden and pressure. But at the same time, I think that's why it is so important for our generation. Like I'm 21, you're 22, and it's so important for our generation because so many of them haven't had the safety and the space to, kind of internalize, look at, and heal from the trauma that they've experienced to be able to speak up about it. And unfortunately and heartbreakingly, for a lot of them, they're just not here anymore to talk about it, whether they're older generations that survived and passed. But also all of the people who were killed and died aren't here to talk about it. And that is why it is so important for us to kind of be the voice moving forward into the future. I think what happened in the past, or even trying to learn from the past, is so futile unless we use it to change the course of action of the future.
Yeah, and I kind of see that in a way of you trying to tie this into like our community having a bond, because if internally we are not all bounded with not the same purpose, but with at least like the same intention of promoting our culture, propagating our history, it the word won't get out there. And I really actually what you said in the beginning was so spot on over our family's healing and our trauma. And something that I've heard my family speak about is that everything happened so fast that they didn't even get time to mourn. They had to like start their life again, how I said they had to start their life from scratch, because if they sat around doing nothing, then where we are today, knock on wood, for every single Kashmiri Pandit family who has like risen from that, I if they wouldn't have like, just jumped back into living life, it would have been so hard for them to be where they are today. And it's I take immense pride in not just my family, but every family who did rise from that horrifying experience. And that I hope that never happens to anyone. But and I still talk to this about my father, like as I mentioned before, like Girjatiku being a very integral part to in my father's life, a motherly figure to him, not just his cousin sister, but someone who looked after him as a son. It was so heartbreaking to hear him say that, yeah, she was my sister. And so he says, like, I think something very important that, people probably don't understand is like when, oh my God, I'm going to start crying. But when the Kashmir files came out, like, I think that was the first time I saw anyone in my family start speaking about it. And so,
And these stories are just really emotional. So don't ever feel bad for feeling that pain and that hurt that has blazed through our community. And you can go ahead and take a minute. But what the point of it, but the point today, 34 years later, is why does it matter? I mean, people can say, well, it's already happened. And they could take the point that you just made, Siddhi, and say, well, you're fine now. You've risen from it. You have families, you have jobs, you've been able to move to America and you have you have the privilege to be able to do that. So why do you care? And you're doing fine. But the thing is, our genocides and our exoduses have never been formally recognized on a global scale. And even if we look since 1990 at the events of the world and seeing the fact that the similar events have replicated all over the world, that is reason enough on why it matters. Because until we learn from what happened in history and provide justice to people, that history will replicate in different places to different people. And that's why it matters. I think in today's age, it is so easy to know and to learn. You just have to care. And I think people that are able to kind of ignore these kind of situations just hold a privilege where those situations don't touch them. And to them, it doesn't matter because they don't touch them, they don't affect their lives. But as children of people who experience a genocide and as Kashmiri Pandits today, knowing our history, being so involved, and personally for me, feeling that frustration of why don't people care and why don't people listen enough? And why are there always excuses? And so I think we would be doing a disservice to our community and to ourselves, to our families, by wasting the platforms that we have to talk about this kind of situation that's happened, whether it's, our Instagram, but also more importantly, this podcast to foster conversations with people who have that history, but also are such intriguing and versatile people in themselves.
Mhm. No, I agree. And I think our genocide shows us why the world must always strive for that understanding and peace. And going back to what you were saying, like that purpose of being a Kashmiri Pandit, I kind of want to ask you a question. I know you have extreme interest and like your educational background kind of ties into international affairs or relations. Which one is it?
Yeah, so I majored for my bachelor's degree in international relations and I minored in history.
Okay. So if you don't mind me asking, was there a purpose? I know we did talk about this, like your papers have been about your identity in Kashmiri Pandit. If you can like talk to us about that, I know it's very important. We've all been saying like take an action, take like have a purpose in your words, have a purpose in your actions. Sorry, that was a little repetitive, but like having that purpose. So if you can like whoever is listening, just for them to hear like your purpose. I would love for our audience to listen in on that.
Yeah, I think when I was really young, like elementary school, I, like any kid, ever so often my mind would change. Oh, I want to be an astronaut. Oh, I want to be a biologist. Oh, I want to be a scientist, a dancer, an artist, whatever it may be for whoever those people, for all of us. But I think it was kind of at that back end of elementary school where I started hearing more stories about our community. And kind of going into sixth grade, I was 13 at the time, and I remember why, like, it had been a while since I'd been hearing these stories, and that frustration that I was just talking about earlier. I mean, I think that's kind of when it started. It's so unsatisfying when you don't have an answer to your question. And that applies to like the smallest question, right? Like kids will ask you, okay, why is the sky blue? And it's like, why? But now you think about, oh, this happened to my parents. Why did it happen to them? Like, why them? Why us? And why don't people care? And from there, I was definitely a lot more inclined in my history classes, my government classes. And from that age, I kind of knew that I wanted to be a lawyer and work in the legal field. And a lot of that inspiration was from my mom. I think talking to her and asking all of these questions, she was probably also like, oh my God, these are so many questions and I don't have the answers either. But there was one thing she always said. She always said, this is just how the system is. And if you want to do something about it, if you want to change the system, you have to be in the system.
Get into the system, yep.
Yeah, because change, especially change in the political systems and the structures that have largely been influenced by, Western society and the way those systems are created, external change is not as fruitive as internal change. And I think her saying that and how many times I heard her say that really stuck with me. And it kind of gave me that push to be like, you know what I think we need as a community is to be recognized globally and politically. And that's kind of where I want to be involved. And that was my push to kind of get into my field. Like I said, did my undergraduate in international relations, and I was also a minor in history. I got a chance to take classes on genocide specifically and learn kind of about philosophical or the theoretical structures of a genocide and how genocide is perpetuated following the event itself by the fact that all genocides are denied. And that's what makes them genocides and ties them all together. Obviously, there are other factors, but yeah, throughout college, I kept that with me. And, I'm going to be going to law school and I plan to keep that with me. But for me, whether it was an essay, whether it was a discussion post, that was my platform to speak about my community. And even if one person read that, discussion post on Canvas and was like, I've never heard about this, or engaged with it in some way, whether they followed up on learning the history or the situation didn't matter because they had been exposed to something and they'd known about something. And I think
Yeah.
at its basic level, that kind of exposure of the reality of what happened is so important to prevent it from being lost to history. Because, like I said, all genocides are denied. And Siddhi, as well as anybody else, how much we've experienced that on our social platforms.
Yeah.
TikTok sees a lot of comments, just outright vile comments, basically calling for our death, questioning our existence, especially in the women of our community. And the reason is because history and time itself has allowed that story to be rewritten and to be rewritten with us no longer part of that story. And that's my driving force for what I do. And I think that legal reparations and political reparations are so important for all groups to be seen and to be heard, because without them, there's always going to be a denial. Um, And I think it's important for our community to find ways to do that. Now, you don't have to study to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
You can still engage in this kind of conversation or this kind of advocacy, no matter what you do, whether you've studied to become an engineer or whether you're working as an astronaut or whatnot. And I think that is something that we, 34 years later, need to continue.
Yeah, and well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your purpose. That was very strong, and I hope anyone who is listening gained any sort of courage or strength to speak out. And I just wanted to like touch base upon what you just said. When someone does speak out, and you just spoke about our social media, this is for anyone listening who has not yet found that strength or courage to speak. You're going to see a lot. You're going to see a lot. You're going to hear a lot. Surbi and I have both used our personal platforms before, and we have seen that hatred, not just on KOA Youth, our KOA platform. Um, there are a good ton of genocide deniers out there, and we are called horrendous things. Cow piss drinkers, for example. If anyone just searches us up on TikTok, KOA Youth, you will see people feuding each other in comments, and I don't even know what the word is. It's like incredibly disgusting to see that people think this way, especially when a minority community is speaking about it. Be strong for anyone who wants to speak. You are going to have moments where you're like, oh my God, what the heck is happening? I'm just talking about my community. How are people not able to, realize? You are going to see a lot of people who just completely deny it. They are going to question everything, how Surbi said. They're going to question your existence. They're going to question your community. They're going to question your purpose. But when you're strong, when you are going to be strong-headed about what you want to say and what you want to relay, you are already taking a step towards preserving our community, propagating our culture, talking about our history. It does come a long way, and it will show in the work and in the words that you are going to say. And I'm very blessed to have such an organization and a platform where I am able to speak about it and have this support system. If we do get hate, we have gotten an insane amount of death threats of speaking about it, an insane amount of, reports that, oh, propaganda, false information. But, as Kashmiri Pandits, we know what we've been through, and there is no one out there who can tell us that our genocide is a hoax, that they can deny it. And, keep your head up. However you want to speak about it. If you ever need any sort of help speaking about it, we're always there for you. Surbi and I, our entire KOA youth team, our entire KOA team, there are so many organizations out there who are willing to give that support for anyone who wants to speak out. So contact us, please. Always. We're always there for you.
And I think what's important to remember, not only as for us as advocates, but also for the people in our comments who are fighting over just our existence,
Yeah.
and B, the people that may not, know about what has happened to our community or don't know as well, or just third parties in general. We do exist, and our existence isn't a question, but more importantly, our oppression being acknowledged does not oppress other people. I think it's super important to remember that if anybody is oppressed, then that leaves room for other people to also be oppressed. In recent years, we've definitely seen a rise in our spaces where whenever we've tried to talk about what's happened to us, people have been like, well, what about this community in Kashmir? And what about this community in Kashmir? And what about what the Indian government is doing? And what about the US government is doing? You're living in US, like you're benefiting. Here's the thing. Bottom line, all those things you're more than welcome to talk about and you're more than welcome to speak about. But engaging in this phenomenon, which is referred to as whataboutism, is not beneficial to them or to us, because right now we're talking about us. Let's focus on us and let's create spaces where you can also talk about X, Y, and Z and focus on them. Because whenever anybody is talking about anything, you're going to be like, well, what about? Hence the name whataboutism. Nobody is being acknowledged. Nobody's being listened to. Nobody's voices are being heard. And I think that we are blocked out of a lot of spaces. I've seen a lot of discourse on Kashmir, and they discuss what has been happening to other groups in the region and no mention of us. And when somebody mentions it, they're like, oh, yeah, about 300 people died. They chose to leave. How? From where are you getting that
Where,
information?
yes, exactly.
And a lot of it is because the people who have like people in positions of power and a lot of people who are directly linked to those that perpetuated the terrorism and the genocide against us rewrote that story early on and pushed it. But like I said, our oppression doesn't cancel out your oppression.
Mhm.
And just because you're facing oppression or somebody else is facing oppression does not mean that they can't indirectly or directly be responsible for the oppression of other groups. I think there is no benefit in co-opting spaces that people are using to talk about their stories to ask them about anyone else. What I am qualified to speak upon is my experiences. And instead of trying to take over my spaces in a aha gotcha moment, you should maybe try to understand and learn the fact that this is a reality. And just because it's different from what you heard doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think us talking about our genocide, us being Kashmiri Pandits, actually any community talking about any sort of persecution, any sort of oppression they faced, is in no way, shape, form, no purpose in a way trying to belittle the other community. We are out here trying to just talk about what we've gone through, and acknowledgement comes a really long way. It just for someone who, if I speak to anyone, as anyone can tell, I'm already very emotional just talking about it. I feel so much love and so much care when someone who is a non-KP who listens to me and kind of, I guess, acknowledges that, yeah, this did happen. And where the hell was news channels? Where was the global media at that time trying to cover everything that went through? And again, I think you said it very beautifully about us speaking about our loss and our genocide and our persecution. Us talking about our oppression should never, and we don't come out with that intent that it should be taking away from other people's oppressions. Like of course, like one thing that people have already have asked me, I've got so many what about questions, is that their lived experiences are 100% wrong as well. But when we are talking about our experiences, I would love for you guys to acknowledge it. I would love for you guys to ask me questions about it so that I could clarify things. And maybe I'm not as knowledgeable, but from what I've heard, speaking to hundreds and thousands of Kashmiri Pandits over the past 3 years, I know a little about our community. I know enough to engage in a conversation. And I know that I can probably, in a very effective conversation, I will know that the person leaving that conversation will go away with some information that they can pass down to someone they talk to. And I'm just hoping the same happens with this podcast. Whoever listens in, I'm just hoping you guys were also able to pick up a little about, why we are here today, why this podcast, why talking about, our oppression means something.
Yeah, and kind of to wrap it up as well, I think we aren't responsible. I think we get blamed a lot for, well, this is what's happening because people are trying to support your community and they're doing these other horrible things to these other people. The thing is, we're never asking for that. And we're not asking for other people to harass, belittle, and oppress other people in the sake of our justice, because that isn't justice.
Yeah.
Um, I think we are held responsible for the actions of others, even though we're not asking for them. And I think it's important to remember that what matters is listening to what we're actually saying and what we actually want, which is just to be recognized and for our genocide to be acknowledged, for our identities to not be erased, and for our community to be celebrated past just the horrors of what have happened, to hear about our culture on whether it's in arts festivals or in political spaces, to see our individuals as key figures in their own respective fields. We want to see the future in a way that is in no way, shape, or form a replica of the past. And using platforms like this podcast, our Instagram, and other organizations, there's a lot of independent Kashmiri Pandit accounts in all sorts of categories. that you should support and you should acknowledge and listen to, and do your best to kind of just learn about the people, learn about our history, because that is important in itself, and that is advocacy in itself. And when we do that for other groups that we're not affiliated with, connected to, and that goes for our community as well, that is how we work together as a community, a global community of humans and people, to kind of fight the systems that are inflicting harm on all of us. Like Siddhi said, we hope that those are kind of like the big takeaways you walk away from this episode, is thinking about the future whilst keeping the past as something to motivate you. Moving forward whilst being seen and heard is what we want.
Yeah, and I think with everything you just said, I think it's a great way to like end this episode. But if I wanted to say like one last thing before we do take our leaves, is that don't let our generation, whoever's listening, any generation, we should not be the last generations talking about this. We need to make sure that whoever listens next, whoever we speak to next, our children, whenever, I mean, like my sister, a whole generation younger than me, I know that I've already started talking to her about it. I've already started, as I said, trickle truding everything into her so that she understands that when she's a little older, a little more mature, can kind of settle things in, that she's like, okay, yeah, my Didi did speak about this to me. We don't want our culture, our heritage, our language, our history to die with us. And as I said before, two generations have already passed. Our grandparents, our great grandparents, they have left this place knowing that they're probably never going to go back home, or with the hope that when are we going to go back home. And I think it's an incredible depiction in the Kashmir Files. And so I'm hoping today, whoever listened in, I hope you guys are able to go back to your daily lives knowing that we are this community out here. We want our voices to be heard, and your voices will be heard as well once you do speak up. And we are completely here for you. And thank you guys so much for listening in. And namaskar. I hope to see you guys in the next couple of episodes. But Surbi, take it away.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Jan 19th, 34 years later, Exodus Day. We are eternally grateful that you have taken the time out of your day to listen to us kind of talk about our experiences and our desires and wishes for the future. We hope that you are able to access our other resources on KOA Youth's Instagram, our TikTok, and all the other wonderful Kashmiri Pandit creators online today, in order to help us remember our history and look to a brighter future. Thank you, and we will see you next time on Everything Kosher.